Are an expert in global media and communication studies. How do you see global media shaping public perceptions of climate change in different cultural contexts?
Thank you. I think one of the important things to understand when we think of global media is that global media today are, for the most part, embedded in very large companies. And these companies tend to have interests that are beyond media. These include mining, these may include gas and oil, may include the kind of properties and capital that will actively militate against honest, critical coverage of climate change, because these issues relate to climate change. So I think that's the first point to understand. I think the second point is that the way that the news industry worldwide has become an actual industry, an industry with profits in mind, with ratings in mind. There's a very breathless coverage that does not take care to analyze, take time to explain causes and effects and outcomes. And so what you see, for example, you see a lot of disaster coverage, which is, wildfires are engulfing Australia. And for a couple of weeks, that's all we hear about. And then it disappears. So there's no sustained coverage. And as a result, there's not a sustained conversation. And so climate change becomes the menu of the day, as opposed to a perennial issue that needs sustainable attention and sustainable action. And unfortunately, for as long as the global media do that, we're not going to see a lot of any different attention to the issue. I think the last thing I would say is, since global media tend to be mostly, and by global media I mean both the media organizations that have global coverage, but media all over the globe, since they tend to be advertising supported, by definition, advertising supported means encouraging consumerism. And consumerism, as you know, the sort of planned obsolescence of commodities and consuming things and discarding them as opposed to repair them, as opposed to long-term use, is also incredibly bad for the environment. So global media are more part of the problem than of the solution, I'm afraid.
How do you think we can work towards resolving this issue when you say that global media is actually part of the problem? How do you see it kind of getting sorted out?
I think advocacy is key. And you know, when we're talking about, we're interested in discussing who's heard and who's seen in the debate on climate change. I think we can't have a naive perspective on this, that if somebody deserves to be heard, they will be heard. If somebody deserves to be visible, they will be visible. That's not how the world works. The way it works is through a process of what scholars call articulation, which is you articulate a local problem that may be obscure, that may be invisible, to an issue that's much more visible worldwide, right? And so I'll give you the one classical example before the debate on climate change became so important and so central, is if you look at the indigenous peasant movement in Mexico, the Zapatistas in southern Mexico, in the state of Chiapas. They had a struggle they had no resources, they were underfunded, they had no public education system, no public health, so on and so forth. Nobody would listen to them until Mexico signed NAFTA with the United States. And there was a lot of activism against NAFTA, against free trade. If you remember, that's the anti-globalization wave. Once they articulated the indigenous issues to NAFTA, then everybody in the world started paying attention. And I think advocates for action on climate change. Yesterday we heard that the bomb has exploded. It's only a matter of time before the shrapnel reaches us. I think need to articulate and explain to people, the vast majority of people who are affected by climate change but are utterly powerless to do anything about it, why it matters to them, why it matters to their daily lives, why it matters to the future of their children. And I think this is when you get this storytelling that is convincing, that is persuasive, that brings people to the issue. That's when we might begin to see something.
My next question is from Dr. Dirk Becker. Dr. Burke is an associate professor of environmental sciences at FCCU. And he has done a lot of research work and activism work to improve the air quality index at FCCU. Can you share some examples of your research that specifically address the environmental challenges faced by marginalized groups?
I think we are all familiar with the fact that the air quality in Lahore is is very bad, and the way we, as let's say, more well-to-do people deal with it is we can very quickly retreat into our homes and buy an air purifier and make the environment that we spend a lot of the time in, whether that is an office or in home, we can adjust that, just like we do when it gets too hot, where we turn on the AC. So you will find the more well-to-do levels of society have that option, whereas the marginalized people do not have that. They live inside a home or a house that does not have perhaps windows or doors, and they're completely exposed to the elements, whether that is air pollution or heat. So they are in direct, they bear the consequences of whatever happens with the climate directly. For many of us, I suspect here in the room, we can buffer that to a very large extent. As I said, we turn on the AC, we turn on the heater, and we just pay for it, and we can pay for it. So, and that is not the fate of many other people that live in Lahore. So I think that's where they particularly bear the brunt of whatever happens with climate and air pollution.
Have been working in the field of research on this climate change, and especially since you're talking about smoke issues. Can you give any example of any of your researches or data collection which can be effectively used to amplify the voices of marginalized communities in environmental decision-making processes? And can we really, as academics, can we really have any impact on the decision-making, governmental decision-making policies and legislation of this issue? Can we do that?
I think so, by being a channel of good and reliable information. I think FC College provides information about air quality on a very frequent basis. So that's a start, and make that freely available to whoever has access to the internet. But FC College is not the only one, but it certainly outpaces the government in providing that information very reliably. So by providing that information, people do become more informed. And I suspect the media will be picking that up very quickly, and because now that information is out there. When we first came to Pakistan, AQIs, it was a bit of a peculiar term, and it was only used by a few people that knew about it. But now you will find daily reports in newspapers, and they talk about air quality. I wouldn't say it has become worse, but people have become much more aware of it. So as people become aware of it, they will try to mitigate it, because air pollution or climate change, for that matter, too, it's not something that will kill you instantly. A bullet will do the job very quickly, but elevated CO2 levels or PM 2.5 levels, they will kill you slowly. But eventually, the effects are very clear and have been very well documented. So we need to be informed and in a reliable manner, and I think we can do that. And by doing that, I think we can drive the policy direction of the government. We can see that already it's becoming more and more a talking point, and the politicians pick up on that.
Now I'll ask my questions from Dr. Azmat Rasool, and I'm going to continue from where we left with Dr. Dirk. Dr. Azmat, how can scientists or academics better engage with the public to raise awareness about climate change and its impacts? Since Dr. Dirk has been talking about the role of academics, so how the scientists and academics and especially media people can better engage with the public to raise awareness about climate change and its impacts.
How academics can contribute towards creating an awareness on issues related to climate change and the media representations of climate change. So, as Marwan was talking about the role of storytelling. So, by telling interesting, immersive stories. So, of course, awareness is important, but awareness is not the ultimate post hoc experience. What do people do with that awareness? So, in order to test these things, we did a study last year, and we tried to create an immersive experience at how people, deal with stories. So we tested this using advertisements. So we created entertaining advertisements, and we showed it to people so that certain types of emotions could be elicited. And then we found out that those emotions did mediate, the relationship between exposure to media and attitude towards climate change and these type of things. So I believe academics has a role to play. They can test different models, they can build theories, they can collect data, reliable data, and then guide policymakers that, okay, this is the data. Unfortunately, in Pakistan, the situation is that we are almost a dataless society. I don't know how government works. Because in the absence of any reliable data, policies, representative policies and nice policies cannot be made. Likewise, as far as media is concerned, we hardly see any interesting, and attention-grabbing type of coverage of climate issues, environmental issues. Normally, they will invite participants in their talk shows, and there will be some kind of news that, okay, Lahore is experiencing number one in air quality, bad air quality index. We should be number one in something else, but we are number one in bad air quality index. So this is it. So people know this already. So if I'm getting the news that Lahore's air quality is bad, I already know that. So what will I get as a result of that type of information? So I believe that media can develop immersive stories. So this is like a theoretical concept that we use in entertainment research: narrative transportation into the narrative. When people are transported, they are immersed in a particular type of narrative. They will identify themselves with the problem. It will generate some kind of enjoyment, and then that enjoyment and identification with the problem will lead to an attitude change towards climate issues. So I believe both media and academics, by doing research, by testing different models, what can be useful, what can create a change, and likewise the media by telling the stories in a very this is what we say in media psych research, eudaimonic way, meaningful way, inspirational stories that can elicit certain types of emotions. So unless there is no emotional attachment or emotional quotient related to this problem, I think this will be as it is.
Dr. Asmat, you are highlighting a very important point, and it has reverberated in these halls as well. Yesterday, Dr. Sylvia, in her panel discussion, she highlighted the need to simplify the terminology. And in one of our concurrent sessions, it was mentioned and highlighted that the common people do not even know the difference between global warming and climate change. So, what can media do? One, to clarify and simplify the terminology related to climate activism or climate communication. And two, you have been talking about immersive storytelling or immersive media dissemination. So, what forms of immersive dissemination can be useful in telling and making climate stories, and especially unheard climate stories, more powerful and impactful?
So for that, as an academic, I would say that we need to test what type of stories people like. So for that, that is where the importance of research comes in. That unless we test that, do people like movies? My own research is based on films, so I test films that how films can change attitude, especially towards females or female politicians. So again, marginalized communities and these type of things. And but other type of, for example, television drama is very popular in Pakistan. Likewise, advertising can be used, and this is what we did. And we actually compared UAE population with the United States population, that how some kind of meaningful advertisements can change attitude towards climate change. So I cannot say for sure that this will be songs, for example, entertainment. I'm an entertainment researcher, so I believe in the power of entertainment. It's a double-edged sword. It can go both ways. It can create, and I think that most of the people, they use media in very, very hedonic way. So by hedonic, I mean that just for enjoyment, just for laughter, to pass time and these type of things. But I think that we can test models and we can do some research to find out that what can make media messages meaningful, what type of meaningful messages, inspirational messages, affect people. So, and these meaningful messages and different entertainment genres can be different for different populations. As we know that, looking at the cultural diversity, looking at, different cultural contexts, we are a very pro-entertainment type of nation. So I cannot say, with certainty that, okay, this type of entertainment content, meaningful entertainment content, which one of our communication scholars, Mary Beth Oliver, she says appreciation, the appreciation of meaningful content, which does not create only enjoyment, but it creates appreciation of an issue. We realize that this issue is important, and I believe that needs to be tested and explored in a meaningful way. That what can be useful. I think I forgot your first question.
It was about terminology, the clarification of the
Yes,
terminology.
Yes, I believe this is, as a journalist, for example, when I started my career as a journalist in the city, we were told by our seniors that, you have to write for someone who is not even a high school person. So, simplifying the terminology, simplifying the jargon, and avoiding the jargon, unnecessary jargon in media narratives, that is extremely important. Because, the kind of, I'm not an environmental communication person, so I don't understand the terminology that Doug can use. And really, I don't know what is that air quality. I only know that air quality index, but what is that in scientific terms? I don't understand that. So I think this is the media professionals, many of our friends are here. They need to simplify and make it, translate the terms in such a way that I believe that one thing more that we can do, that we can translate these terms in such a way that they connect with culture. Right. So sometimes the translation is worse than the actual term. So if we can somehow connect to the cultural practices and make it like more understandable to common people who are receiving all those messages, I believe that can work. And this is an essential responsibility of journalists, of media content creators, to create their content in such a way that everybody can understand that.
So maybe academics and scientists and media persons, they can collaborate on these lines to simplify and clarify the terminologies. And we were also discussing yesterday about localizing the terminology and indigenizing the terminologies so that the local people can connect better. They can understand better and they can connect better with what global warming means in our context, in Pakistani local context. I'll now ask my questions from Ms. Imrana, and I have saved Dr. Shafiq for the last input because he will be talking mainly about how to incorporate marginalized voices in academia and in media for the climate activism and climate communication. So Ms. Imrana Tivana, she has been doing environmental activism for a while. Ms. Imrana, I would like to ask you, how can climate narratives better represent marginalized voices in Pakistan? And we'll mainly be talking with you about narratives, especially the significance of cultural storytelling, as we have now started talking about localizing and indigenizing our climate crisis stories. So how do you see it? How we can do that?
I think to start with, I'd like to say that we are confronted with an existentialist conundrum more than ever before. With rapidly shifting geopolitical pivots, we find that disparities and inequalities have increased radically. It is a very serious dispensation of the world order, which has completely changed, and the questions have changed. The answers and the narratives accordingly need to change radically. I think that there is in UNESCO a term called the vanishing city syndrome, where the disappearance of culture and heritage and now the environment is very visible. And I would call sitting in Lahore in a toxic gas chamber with life expectancy reduced by 7 to 8 years, knowing what our issues are. I would call this a city of invisible citizens, where 98% are not even seen, leave alone heard. And as Dr. Becker rightly said, how many of us can go and buy air purifiers? Not many. I think not even, it must be the 99% that can't go out. And so the inequity continues to rise. So the first thing in terms of awareness is to understand that the dispensation of governance, particularly democratic governance, must be equitable and inclusive. Having said that, the laws are all in place. If you look at the laws of this country relating to climate, the Oil Refinery Act, the Electric Vehicle Act, the Clean Air Policy, the smog policy, it started 30 years ago. And it looks like the perfect picture. It's utopic. But when we see ground realities, there's absolutely nothing that you can see on ground. And we know that the flooding in 2022 damage was $15 billion. The GDP lost another $15 billion. And rehabilitation is going to cost us $17 billion. So these are staggering amounts where climate damage needs to be addressed. Leave alone the common man on the road who, whose 5-year-old is on a ventilator, because that is Lahore today. The city, 5,000 years old, the city of gardens has been reduced, but I'm very hopeful. And so coming back to women, the marginalized, women in low income areas often bear a disproportionate burden as they are more dependent on climate sensitive resources. Climate adaptation policies need to tackle the underlying social inequities, such as limited access to healthcare and education. Pakistan's climate justice movement calls for international assistance, of course, to mitigate this. We all know that we produce less than 1% in the 7 most vulnerable, and we did float the loss and damages fund at COP last year. I don't think much has been done about it, but I hope that it can proceed. The youth, another marginalized group, voices in climate activism in Pakistan, are utilizing platforms like social media and local art to engage broader audiences in climate activism. Grassroots movements led by marginalized communities provide very interestingly innovative, authentic, locally rooted climate solutions. And that's what we really need is for these clusters to come alive and integrate as a network to become a more powerful voice. There's a growing call to bridge generational and cultural divides in climate advocacy to ensure inclusivity. So collaborations between youth-led organizations, academia, and marginalized communities amplify underrepresented voices in climate campaigns. And some of the solutions to this, if I may, climate resilience can be improved, again, by integrating community-driven storytelling. And as Dr. Saab said, to make it more interesting, of course, the world is now centered around EQ. We never realized how important EQ was. And I think that is a focal pivot that we need to address. Local leaders need tools and platforms to champion climate adaptation initiatives. And I'm talking about the local government that does not exist. We have not had a local government here since forever. And the dispensation of the city and what happens within it is the mandate of the local government. So when the provincial government begins to address it, it is constitutionally a violation. And I think local governments need to come into place. Marginalized voices, often neglected in climate conversations, hold very critical insights into sustainable solutions. So the blending of traditional and scientific knowledge systems can create localized responses. Grassroots efforts are essential for fostering inclusive climate action. So these are some of my thoughts on this, and talking about the women, I talked about women and empowering them through access to resources. Just one last point is just to understand what we're talking about. Of course, in this city, the vegetables are carcinogenic. The water has lead and arsenic in it. We have the dirtiest, most polluted river in the world, and Hadiara drain. What are we talking about? Are we all living in an alternate reality? Do we not see that we have not had a single waste treatment plant in Lahore since partition? We're making the Ravi Urban Development Authority, which is another 14 million footprint, adding to the 14 million we have already, which is going to estimated to be 30 million people in this city. Can we afford to do that? Is it killing our people? Is it a lack of understanding of urbanization, where cities need to have boundaries so that we can have integrated development? There is no other way. And so agriculture, 3.6 million acres of crops were destroyed in the 2022 floods. 750,000 livestock were killed. 1/3 of Pakistan's landmass was submerged underwater. Nearly 24,000 schools were damaged. Bridges were destroyed. The estimated losses exceed 30 billion, which far surpasses the 1.5 billion emergency relief from the IMF. And I really think we don't really need to depend on the IMF. We need to mobilize our resources in an innovative way, because this is a homegrown issue which needs to be dealt with through communities, through academia, through the local government, through youth. The humanitarian impact, over 33 million people were affected, including 7.6 million that were displaced. And this is at the macro level. If I were to start talking about Lahore, we'd need a whole other session, and I don't want to take too much time. The death toll surpasses 2,000, including several hundreds of children, displaced individuals. 16 million children were impacted. And 650,000 pregnant women, prenatal deaths require maternal care. The health system, pre-existing vulnerabilities due to COVID-19, over 2,000 primary health facilities were affected. 400 was destroyed, delivery of systems. And we can go on and on. We know these facts. Living in Pakistan, we're very aware of this, because we are impacted by these at the micro and the macro levels. So this is very pertinent, having this deliberation, the 2-day, and congratulations to ICA and to put this together. I'm very hopeful. Having said all this, I am extremely hopeful that together collectively on a collective platform, we can address this. We have the expertise, we have the resources, we have the manpower, we have our youth bulge, we have local communities. So why can't we do it? And inshallah, I'm hopeful that with deliberations like this, we will be able to reverse this.
Thank you, Ms. Imrana. Now I would like to take Dr. Shafiq's input. Dr. Shafiq, what do you think, how important it is to incorporate multiple disciplines in studying climate change and its effects on society, and especially marginalized voices within media and academia? How do we incorporate it, and how important it is to incorporate?
I would like to add on here two of my personal experiences being as a self-identified environmental communication reporter and as an environmental communication expert. Recently, as you have seen, that we have experienced this smog episode over here in Lahore. So in the absence of expert environmental reporters, many of the media channels in Lahore, news channels, they contacted me and asked me that please help us and our audience, eventually our audience, to understand what this smog is and how it is formed and how we can get rid of this. So eventually I have to visit so many TV channels in different points in time during the last 1 month. And what I experienced over there, they invited me during their live news bulletins. And when I started explaining what is this phenomenon of smog, all of a sudden they received a phone call that some of the political activist has been arrested by police in Sindh province, and all of the attention of the news production room and everybody, it has been shifted to there, and then they put me on hold for the next half an hour, and then eventually the time is over, and then they said. So I feel myself marginalized in this environment. So secondly, this marginalization is everywhere in the media. You can see that, like one of my friend here, he has come from Gilgit-Baltistan, and I was asking him that on the one hand, we do not have experienced environmental reporters. On the other hand, we do not have them from different parts of the country. Glacial lake, we call it glacial lake outburst flooding, which is a very common phenomenon over here. But majority of the people sitting in this room, they are totally unaware about this phenomenon. Pakistan has the world's second largest glaciers in the north of and they are melting at a roller coaster speed. But unfortunately, no reporter have been taken, because the city journalism here in Lahore, in Islamabad, it is, basically reporters, they are taken from Punjab University, from FC College, from UCP. So another marginalized, similarly, this year we have experienced another thing, like bushfires in different, big forests of the country. Already we have very, small forest cover over here. And then what we have seen that because no reporter was taken from Kosar University, from Sargodha University, so we were totally unaware about the actual situation which happened over there in Kalar Kahar, in Sunskesar forest, or in Mari's forest, what happened over there. So, being as the resident of Lahore, we hear that Lahore is being deprived of, these forests around the city. But we have never heard about land use change of forestry in, the Murray area, how the land grabbers have reached over there and they have started, removing trees from the, very small piece of land, which is currently having good tree cover in Murray and Galiyat areas. Since we do not have reporters from these areas, so eventually we do not have a good understanding of LUCF and GLOF and similar such phenomenon. Similarly, we do not have good female reporters in the media, as Dr. Imrana was mentioning that. That's why their voice is marginalized. In the village area of Pakistan, women, Can you imagine majority of the women in the rural areas of the Pakistan, they are highly affected by indoor air pollution because they have to cook their food 3 times in a day in a in a kitchen which is totally covered, and the fuel that they use. But none of the media, they are highlighting that how these women communities, they are being marginalized because their voices, it does not exist over there in the media. So marginalization is very much there in the media industry and also in the environmental communication academia as well. Being as an aspirant of environmental communication research, what I often experience that whenever I write an article, despite, as Dr. Asbat has mentioned, that despite the non-availability of data, if by every hook or crook or by every, using every means, if I produce data and then I submit it to the journal, in the initial stages from 3 to 4 good journals, I always receive rejection, because they say that because the target audience of our journal, it mostly lies in the global west, in the China, and you have highlighted an issue of a country which is very which is situated in the global north, so we do not have enough audience for you, so we are very sorry to send you this rejection. Secondly, I can see so many colleagues over here in this room who are published in good journals with good data, but I cannot see them being the part of the editorial boards of environmental communication, International Journal of Communication, journalism practice, journalism. So this marginalization is very much there in us, being as a journalist and being as in an environmental communication academic.
Before we move on to the QA sessions and you interact with the audience, I felt that we were talking about unseen, unheard, and marginalized voices, and we feel even in the center in Lahore, we are unheard. The way Ms. Imrana was talking about water scarcity and water pollution, and the way Dr. Shafiq highlighted the issue. And it is significant to incorporate the stories, and I was also thinking about the importance of storytelling, and you people have been talking from the perspective of media stories. Since I'm a literature person, I was thinking about writing short stories, novels, because it reminded me of a novel by Uzma Aslam Khan, where she talks about the melting of glaciers in the northern areas and their local tradition of marrying the glaciers. They marry the glacier to give birth to another glacier. So this kind of indigenized stories, if some sort of competitions can be organized, we can create links between academia, universities. It might bring the original indigenized stories, as you've been talking about Murray, Gilgit, Baltistan, Hunza, interior Sindh, and gender-oriented stories as well. So I would stop talking here, and we would like to take questions from the audience. If you people have questions, please raise your hand and we'll bring this mic to you people. If you people have question from a specific panelist, you can tell us. Otherwise, we can take it. Anybody on the panel can take that question.
The last 2 days, I'm listening panelists on the climate change and communication. And sorry to mention, out of Lahore, nothing is mentioned, even in Punjab. Or if that is mentioned, it's very rarely mentioned. Second, Dr. Marwan pointed out that elites are deciding everything, from advertisement to financing media. Then how could we go for the solution? And out of this context that we are discussing, the solution exists in the political elites. Then why are we more stressing the issue on the commoners? Thank you.
This is I think the question you raised is perhaps the most vital and most important question, which is how do you increase the cost of non-action for the people who make decisions? And this is a very difficult question to answer. I mean, advocacy is real, it's very important, but there needs to be a kind of alliance for who are harmed by this, right? Because ultimately, no matter how wealthy you are, no matter how isolated you are, no matter how many air purifiers and villas and swimming pools and air conditioners you put between you and the world, ultimately the world will catch up to you, right? And so ultimately there are people have interests that can be targeted. I think you mentioned novels. I think the challenge with novels is that, you know, people in this room will read them. But novels are not quite the popular medium, right? I think more of mobilizing people through a mural art, painting on the wall, through folk stories. How do you introduce themes related to climate change? How do you connect that somebody's land is no longer arable, which for them is a real issue? You know, what in the United States they call bread and butter issues, right? To what's going on in the world, to kilns that are making bricks, to cars that are creating smoke, so on and so forth. Make people feel the connections. I think that's very important. In other parts of the world, you know, I remember I wrote a book about the Arab uprisings, and one of the most successful ways in which people became aware of issues was finger puppetry. Because finger puppetry is very old medium, right? Or shadow puppetry. And people pay attention, particularly in rural areas where you don't have many more forms of entertainment. And so how do you articulate stories that, again, connect people's daily experience, the hyper-local, with these big forces that none of us can control? I think the more people become aware of this, the more they might be ready to act. And popular pressure can be put on even the most entrenched decision makers. I wish I had a sort of a more actionable solution that says, we do this first, we do this second, we do this third. But as you said, the general steps are known. They just need to be executed. They just need to be implemented.
You're absolutely right. And I think it is a critical question. Just an example, a case in point, where the dispensation of governance was something that would have brought severe degradation to the city of Lahore. The canal in Lahore, they wanted to build 4 lanes on either side to make a motorway about 15 years ago and make it signal free. And so the people, and there were X marks, red, big X marks on all the trees. And so everyone down the canal would look at these X marks and just drive by till something called the Lahore Bachao Tehreek was born it was a group of citizens who were very concerned that we're going to lose 37,000 trees, we're going to lose 2,300 acres of green belt. And so here is an example of a political dispensation where the people of Lahore got up and they were just everywhere. Awareness, media, TV, they wrote to the Prime Minister. And you know what happened? The Chief Justice of Pakistan took suo motu notice because the people got up and because the media got up and because suddenly they could not ignore it anymore. And so it's a very long story and it's a fantastic story because we had a milestone judgment after a year and a half of deliberations, where we put in the content was from the people, from academia, from professionals, why it shouldn't be done, why we need this. We've lost 75% of green cover in the last 10 years in Lahore. And so, for the first time, the Supreme Court ordered that an act be made by the Punjab Parliament. And so we had the first Lahore Canal Urban Heritage Act passed, which protected this for all time to come. And in the judgment, it was 400 pages, and I urge all of you to read it as responsible citizens. But the prime dispensation in that judgment was quoted internationally, said that the people of this city and this country got up to speak for their rights. And that is Article 9 of the Constitution of this country, which says everyone has a right to life. And so when we see that there is something which will have far-reaching effects, the voice of the people, and like you said, I love the puppetry, where we do have that tradition even in Pakistan, and street theater. So it's wonderful. There are many, many, many ways to do it. I think all of us need to wake up from a very deep slumber. It's almost like Rip Van Winkle, who went to sleep and woke up in a gas chamber where he couldn't breathe. So, you know, the enormity of the crisis is now something that we can't neglect. So I think all of us need to get up, you know, in our own way, whatever we're doing, even if it's a street hawker. When we did the Lahore Canal thing, we had donkey carts and we had kids on it and we had jalebi makers and we had samosa makers and everyone. Some of them went to the Supreme Court of Pakistan and they actually stood there and we spoke in front of the Chief Justice, because all we were doing was speaking the truth and for the people of this country to have a better life.
Beautiful question, wonderful question. Why Quetta is not mentioned? You know, we're talking about Lahore. We're talking about, you know, I really want to apologize to Miss Imrana, you know, Lahore and Canal and all these things. So we are really concerned about that. But we don't talk about Quetta. We don't talk about Dera Ghazi Khan. We don't talk about remote areas. Let me tell you one thing, my friend, that this is not a systematic omission. All over the world, media is known for having a bias in favor of big cities. So anything, you know, anything happening in London, in New York, in LA, in Dubai, in Tokyo, that gets media attention. In Lahore. And unfortunately, the rural areas, the remote areas, and other places. And one of the reasons is that Dr. Kambo mentioned that, you know, there are no reporters from that area. How many people are functional in Pakistani media who are from, like, you know, from Quetta, from other areas? But, you know, what I want to say that this is not a systematic thing, that nobody talks about Quetta here, or Balochistan here, or remote areas here. This is just a tendency which continues all over the world. And the second thing is about, you know, your question about the elites. Yes, elite kept, who's telling stories about media? Who are the people who are talking about media? You know, so, but are the marginalized communities willing to speak? So this morning I was coming to this session and I saw females, you know, sweeping the road. And one, there is this all over in the skies, and then they were sweeping the roads and all the dust, and they were, you know, I don't know whether they had anything on their faces or not. And cars, one car, one child, dropping them to school. I was not hoping to be here on time because there were so many cars. I was drowned in a flood of cars in a city where I used to live, where I spent my life, which used to be a beautiful place. So everybody sitting in this room is responsible for this environmental problem. All of you have cars. You guys are responsible living in Lahore for this problem. And now you are talking about the problem, and the people who are suffering because of this issue, who tells their stories? Are they telling their stories? According to an African proverb, until lions learn to write, every story will glorify the hunter. So the lions don't know how to write. And you know, all the elites, all of you, you get media coverage, this nice conference, photos and all these things, and done, nothing. Sorry.
Yes, I would like to add on this discussion. There is a good ray of hope that we are right now experiencing over here. A new, you know, you can say that a chapter of journalism is being, you know, functional in this part of the world right now. We are experiencing the local languages, versions of international media over here, bbcurdu.com, independenturdu.com, and Voice of America Urdu.com, dwurdu.com. They are journalists. They are well trained and they have been taken from different parts of the country. So right now they are becoming the voice of the voiceless people over here. So this is what I have experienced during this smog episode. I, you know, appeared on a local television channel, and I, you know, bashed the government policy that it has, brought over there in Baku to, get money from the COP on the name of climate finance. And I said that the agenda that they have brought over there, it's totally fake right now. The biggest problem with Pakistan is that with existing transport system and with the existing livestock sector and with the existing agriculture practices, we cannot have the solution of this pollutants emissions and this greenhouse emissions from this part of the world. No matter how many e-bikes, e-transport you introduce over here, unless and until you perish all this old trucks from here, these tractors, and you do not bring good breeds of cows, buffaloes to avoid cow burps, and unless you do not bring good seeds of rice that emit less methane from the paddy rice fields, you cannot improve the state of climate change and smog over here. That channel, they overturned the story and they said that we are unable to run it from here. Then eventually I got connected to somebody in Voice of America Urdu in Washington, and they run a whole program on that. So we have good voices in the media. We have now Afifa Nasrullah from Lahore. We have Amar Garrodo from Sindh in independenturdu.com. We have Saman Khan in Voice of America Urdu. We have Adib Yusuf Zai from Sawat in urdunews.com. So this new layer of journalism has, it has given us a ray of hope and inclusivity in this part of the world. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment about the purpose we are here, keeping focus on the marginalized people. But I think the example that I heard about a local protest, trying to minimize the environmental damage by widening the canal road. I'm not sure whether that was an uprising by the populace or whether that was an uprising by the much more educated layers of society. So, I mean, to me, the marginalized person might care about climate, but to me, their priority in life is feeding their family and feeding themselves. And anything that would come their way that would obstruct that is completely ignored, whether that is changing their farming practices, switching to an e-bike, if that is more expensive, just to improve the environment of Lahoris. I don't think they couldn't care less, because it will affect the bottom line for all of them. So I think in lots of the solutions or things we talk about, I think for us it would be just sitting here and being here. It's difficult to imagine what it is like to be a marginalized person and to be at the mercy of others all the time. I mean, I've got a bit to do with brick kiln workers, and most of the brick kiln owners, as far as I understand, they are very involved in government circles. They're completely aware of air pollution and all the social injustices that occur there. But for those that work on that make the bricks and are involved at that level, their voice is completely not ignored, but they're basically powerless. So, because for them, again, surviving is of an essence, and I suspect that is the case for most marginalized people, whether they're in the rural areas or in the colonies here in Lahore. They go out to work, try to score a job for the day, and get paid, and then try to find somewhere where they can spend that money and feed their children and themselves. So, I think we have to be very aware of their plight, because, as I said, many of solutions that we come up with, I think, don't include that type of those aspects.
Wonderful question, and thank you so much for everyone's input. Dr. Firasat, do we have time for another question?
First of all, since yesterday's discussion and right from today, at least all of us are agreed that we don't expect from the commercially driven media that it will take up issues like this. especially when it comes to the advertising and the other revenue related issues. Talking and responding to Malik's question, look, when the TRPs generate from the urban areas, so how do we expect that the marginalized rural areas or the other provinces would be covered by the mainstream media? The other aspect which I want to highlight that we do not have much expectations from the media, but we have a lot of examples that when the public was sensitized regarding different issues, we were successful in getting the legislation at the national level. I will like to refer to examples over here. For example, in 1980s, the son of a lady in California was killed by a drunk driver. So she started a movement, advocacy movement, and now we find the 80 chapters of mothers against drunk driving in Canada and US, and the legislation has been passed over there, and it is a very strict legislation against the drunk drivers. Similarly, when it comes to the tobacco industry, it used to be one of the major advertisers for the electronic and the print media, and we may recall from our childhood that even the sporting events used to be sponsored by the tobacco industry. But now we see that there is no advertisement on TV, no advertisement on newspaper. It means when we are in a position to guide the common people, we may bring a lot of change. What to do? My question is how we can sensitize the people that when government takes actions, for example, and if we talk again about Lahore, when there are certain holidays and vacations in schools, just in order to reduce the air pollution levels, what to say that people go in the parks and they take it as their sporting activities and vacational activities. So I think one of the most important thing is that we need to sensitize the people. My question from the panel is that although you have given certain suggestions, that how can we include the people and go for the participatory?
We need to change our reporting, news reporting practices over here. Mr. Shakib and Dr. Bushra, they have published a wonderful paper on that. Like the news reporting of climate change related issues, they are mostly episodic, using episodic frames. They just tell us about an episode of a climate change or environmental induced issue, and then they do not, sensitize people by using thematic framing that yes, the air quality of Lahore is today, it is the worst in the world, but they should also tell us that in this worst air quality level, what should we do? We should try to remain at our homes along with our kids. The government has given free timings to the schools and to kids. So it does not mean that you should just accompany them and bring them to the parks and other leisure activities. So, and similarly, you should also teach people about the repercussions, the ramifications of this smog, along with this episode of episodic frame that the quality of air is worst in Lahore. So I think that we need to improve the reporting of the environmental climate related issues, and eventually when the people, they are sensitized, when they are aware about the repercussions, the direct effect on their health and their economy, eventually they will become more sensitized.
Thank you for the great insights you share with us. My name is Akbarali. I am coming from a region which is highly marginalized, both politically, economically, culturally, and environmentally, the region which is known as Baltistan. My question is, as you mentioned, that the media spaces are elite captured. So, what can be done to to make it more people captured spaces rather than elite captured spaces? And the second question, perhaps that is more important and interesting to me, is as the theme of this conference reflects, how can we maximize the scope of social sciences or interdisciplinary approaches when it comes to address the issue of climate change? If you look at the Pakistani curriculum, which is being taught at universities, one could hardly see any curriculum which is interdisciplinary on climate change. The existing curriculum is more, is being taught from nature sciences perspective, not from the humanities or social science perspectives. So my question from the panelists is, are our universities in Pakistan equipped enough, when it comes to their curriculum or research to address this issue of climate change? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a very good comment or question you asked there, I've been involved with some of the curriculum development, and at the moment, through the Department of Climate Change and funding through the German government, they have developed quite an extensive curriculum on climate change with a lot of material that is available to the average person, or at least meant to be available. So there are certainly a lot of changes going to happen, and for us as a department, we've got a number of courses on the books that will specifically address that area, and we're talking to different departments where we can collaborate. So I think you will see over the next 5 years big changes happening at the university level across Pakistan.
So the inter-provincial collaborative aspect of this hub of excellence stretches from Sindh, Balochistan up to GB, Karakoram University and Swat University and many other universities, where we made a charter, and hopefully we will be sharing this charter with all the academic institutions as a collective platform, and we urge you to come on board. We also have international collaborations with institutes like Columbia, STSN, Harvard, MIT, and about 200, maybe more, other universities and youth groups. So we're happy to announce this, and we look forward to collaborating on this and make a positive impact on the academic side of this, where actually all the research is carried out in universities. And just adding to that, the common man is concerned with subsistence, absolutely. He can't go out, he doesn't have the time, he doesn't have the money. Dr. Becker's absolutely right. And so that is where the collective intellectual expertise needs to innovate. We are here to speak for those who have no voice because they are powerless. And so when we speak for them, of course they know and they're involved. And we give a voice to the voiceless, right? And that is where positive change comes about collectively. It may be silent. And I'll just give an example. We were going to the Supreme Court once, and there was a thele wala, this redi wala in Ichra, was very keen. And I said, look, sit in the car and come with us. And he said exactly that. He said, I can't afford to. I can't leave my work. I need to feed my children tonight. And we said, don't worry at all, because we're here. We're here to be your voice. And inshallah, when things begin to change and policies change and laws are enacted, and the judiciary and the legislature and the executive come together, what is it for? It's for the people, right? We're not taking it home, in little boxes for us. It is to mobilize something much bigger than ourselves. Thank you.